Fuck is going on? Who the fuck are you people? They made another Insidious movie.
Where do I even start with Insidious 4? The travesty that is the train wreck of modern horror cinema lies within the depths of this stupid movie. While I'll admit I have clearly never been a huge fan of the Insidious series, as evident by my previous reviews on the subject, at least they had some semblance of coherent structure. James Wan is at least a competent director. He's made things in the past that aren't bad. I mean, he's the man behind Saw. And while watching Insidious 1 or 2, I was aware that I was alive and I was indeed watching a movie. Insidious 4, I just felt dead the entire time. I died, was buried, and had a funeral by the time the movie was done. So remember a few years ago at the end of Insidious 3, I talked about the things that we'd learned from the Insidious movies? I was in the opinion that they'd ended as a trilogy. I didn't know this series had fucking saga material in it. I said these things. 1. If your movie is slow, have substance to make it worth it. 2. Your antagonists should be credible threats, otherwise they're not scary. 3. Never end your movie on a cliffhanger unless it's worthy of a sequel. 4. Tiptoe through the tulips isn't scary. Insidious 4 took all the things I said not to do and basically decided, fuck it. Throw all of that out of the window and create a whole new level of shitfest. To go through the list, 1, this movie is more than just slow, it's incoherent. It's not building towards anything of substance. It's just jumping around, doing God knows what before ending, and once it's over, you're actually surprised it ended. You let out an audible, that's it? 2, the antagonists are even more laughably asinine than before, opting for a more spiritual conflict, no pun intended, where psychic old lady is facing the real demons we all face, her past. Her strained relationship with her father and how she dealt with that is the focus of this scary movie, and the bullshit ghost nonsense is all side plot. 3, technically the movie doesn't end on a cliffhanger because it's a prequel again, so we know everything that happens, but that's its own can of worms, and we'll get into that later. And finally, this movie doesn't have tiptoe through the tulips, but it has something even worse. Nothing. There's nothing scary in the movie. There's not even a clear and present danger to the outside world. They kill off the only IRL antagonist in the first third, and from then on out, it's all Ghost World level shit, and as I've said in previous reviews, that means jack all to anything. So we open in 1953 in the fictional town of Five Keys, New Mexico at the state penitentiary. Spoopy oil well. Here we see young Elise, the psychic old lady in her childhood home with her parents' shitty dad 2000 and mom who puts up with too much shit because of course she does. They're living in the tired old trope world of our daughter has powers and we don't understand it, so we're going to beat the shit out of her land. So dad is fed up with Elise's ghost shit and puts her in the clearly not haunted basement that every home has where she will have no contact with any further ghosts. Of course, she finds some ghosts. So the ghosts kill mom, and the dad is pretty pissed, and that was the first 16 minutes of the movie. Hope you liked it. Time for the same old bullshit Insidious movie we're all used to by now.
Behold, the reason I was up all night. The lights. That's right, my friends, it's voice activated. No more dealing with those pesky switches, having to find them in the dark, straining fingers as you switch them.
Yeah, that was a real problem before, you know.
Toil in the darkness of sarcasm, my friend. I prefer to work in the lights.
The Paramormons have been updated from unimportant side characters to terrible, unimportant comic relief. Elise gets a phone call for a job that's all the way out in Five Keys, which is, we've just established, the bad place from before. This is the first indication of the terrible writing we're in store for. Opening with a flashback makes sense on paper. Sure, it's a way to establish stuff, but it just feels so on the nose and poorly paced when it's done this way. Imagine if the story had opened in media res. Elise and the Paramormons are walking around doing shit. Maybe the stupid light bulb joke gets worked in. Everything is normal. We're getting to re-establish who our main characters are, having not seen them since Insidious 3. What have they been doing in the meantime? What sort of place were they in before Insidious 1? And then suddenly a phone call. It's the guy. He's asking Elise to come and see his house. She stops. She shakes. We as the audience are confused. Why should she be so afraid of this one place? What about it prevents her from wanting to go? It adds a level of mystery and suspense to the opening and gives us a little more to chew on as the mystery progresses. As it is now, the movie just lays it all out for you in one go, chronologically detailing everything so you, the audience, don't have to think too hard.
He lives in the house that I grew up in. I call it a house because it wasn't a home.
Yes, because people say that. A real-life human, not a movie character, would say that. Here she is detailing the events of the flashback to the Paramormons in an exposition scene that's literally a recap of the opening to the movie. I feel like at some point this movie was constructed in such a way to be sort of like the version that I pitched, but some studio exec came along and said, "Hey, Lay, small suggestion, maybe explain everything to the audience that you possibly can and hammer it into their brains because you can't trust your audience one bit."
Not this time. This one I have to do alone.
We have to come with you now. This cost us $700.
What? This one is pretty personal, guys. I really gotta do it alone cop style. Hey, bitch, we bought a bus! Oh, well, now I guess you have to go. So now we've started this seemingly unrelated subplot about this guy who owns Elise's old house. It starts as a routine haunting investigation by the team, but ultimately turns into, like, a criminal investigation? As it turns out, the guy is being possessed by a demon who was telling him to do bad shit to women. There's still a supernatural edge to it, but for the most part, it's just that he was kidnapping women and assaulting them and or killing them. This plot takes about 35 minutes worth of the movie, and it really has no bearing on anything related to anything. I mean, it does come back later in the film that Elise's father was also being possessed by the same demon, and it turned out that he too was kidnapping and abusing women in the very same basement, but, like, it's sort of revealed as a got you at the end. Like, turns out his behavior was caused by demons. Except why? Why not just have the guy who owns the house have a family and have him be mean to the kids? Like, have it be connected to the story as a whole instead of just interjecting some half-assed, thought-out subplot of kidnapping for really no good reason. She meets her estranged brother and his daughters in a diner, seemingly completely by accident. This leads to some real drama.
I just want you to hear my piece. I didn't know how this was going to go.
Oh, I thought you could see the future.
Is this really your sister?
No, it isn't. Come on.
Yes, I am his sister.
Listen to me. You listen. Now, when we were children, you terrified me. You scared the life out of me with stories about a monster behind a red door, and then you opened the door and you left. You left me. You abandoned me to a real monster, our father. Look, I wish you no harm, but you stay away from us, Elise. You stay away.
The dramatic scenes in this movie are written like a soap opera. The dialogue is absolutely horrible. The pacing is too slow to make anything interesting, but then will pick up way too quick to make anything important or lasting. So around the 1 hour mark, we finally get some semblance of a conflict that relates to the main theme of the plot. Elise's niece is looking around the old basement to do something. I don't know, look for her dad. I don't fucking care. She gets attacked by the Keys for Fingers demon, and he steals her soul. So, much like in the first Insidious, someone is in a coma and is lost in the further while Elise has to go into that world and save them from the demons. The rest of the film is very much a cut and paste of any of the last Insidious films. It's nothing new, nothing we haven't already seen before, but this time the plot has meandered so far away from anything of substance that we have little time to do anything but what's expected. The demon, it turns out, feeds on hatred, so Elise decides to stop feeding it by just stop being a dick to her dad's ghost. So she ultimately defeats the demon by doing what? Nothing. Nothing happens. She ultimately defeats the demon by blowing the whistle her brother had in the beginning of the movie and calls on her mom's ghost. Somehow that just works? I guess she was stronger than it? But if that's the fucking case, then why was this demon able to prosper in the first place? What was giving it any power? If literally one ghost is strong enough to defeat it, what was the threat? And for that matter, what did Elise do that was different or special? If her arc was that she needed to learn to not become, a dick like her father, there was never a moment where she showed that she was even remotely capable of being as big of an asshole as he was. She didn't overcome anything. She didn't learn anything. And what did the mother's ghost have to do with the story as a whole? It has no bearing on the demon, it's just a cheap emotional manipulation. So the movie ends with basically nothing resolved other than demons are shit-eaters who do bad stuff. There's nothing to be gained or learned from this story. The characters have nothing new given to them or taken away, and ultimately it had nothing to do with the first 3 movies. This movie very much has a and then structure to it. None of these scenes are really so interconnected that they could be put into any other order and still be pretty much unaltered in the grand scheme of things. This movie was like if a little kid sat down and started to tell a ghost story and he just made everything up as he went along. I feel like this movie was probably written as like one draft, and he just kind of handed it into the studio and said, hey, do you guys think this is a good story? And they go, let's make this. Let's just make this movie. And he goes, well, I haven't really edited it yet. And they go, I don't care. The demon was utterly pointless to the story. Why does he make humans kidnap women? What does that have to do with getting keys on his hands? Why keys at all? I mean, I guess he opens up doors, but then what does that have to do with keeping people? Is it because he makes them lock them up? I don't get it. We learn nothing, we gain nothing, and it was a literal drain sitting here for a half an hour leading up to nothing. So when you make a prequel, you gotta have some idea as to what story you think is important to tell. Insidious has already done a prequel. Actually, it's done a sequel, then a prequel, then a sequel to that prequel, which is still a prequel to the first. If you're confused, I don't blame you. The problem this movie faces, much like how its previous installments faced, is that prequel stories are very hard to make interesting or tense. When you already know the outcome to these characters' stories, when you know that no matter how this particular movie ends, your main 3 characters will live until the events of the first movie, you really melt the tension away. There are good ways to make prequels, and to make them important to the story as a whole. Sometimes it's just good character development to show a character's backstory, see how they got here, and what they did prior to the events of the story about them that we like. A movie like Godfather 2 really set the stage for a proper prequel. Is it fair to compare Insidious 4 to Godfather 2? No, of course not. Get the fuck out of here. You knew that before I even asked. The problem here is that I really don't care about these characters or their problems leading up to the first movie. We've already established that the start of the ghost hunting business that was Paramormonism in the last movie, we showed their first case and their first outing, and we've seen how they've established methodology and all their ghost hunting shit, yada, yada, yada. So this movie fails immediately by being an unnecessary story from the start. Sure, you might say that we get a glimpse into Elisa's backstory a bit further, learn about her past and her family, and that's fine, but that's not the focus of the movie. See, if the focus had been about telling a compelling, character-driven backstory, they wouldn't have had old Keyfingers McGhostfuck over here. When you make your movie just another one of those tired Insidious formulas, you sort of lock yourself out of doing anything more interesting with the plot. Like I've already said, they killed this character off in the first movie, thus writing themselves into a hole about where to take these stories. So they decided to just move backwards to keep the most interesting character in, but then they just made it another Demon of the Week affair and making the major conflict pointless. See, a horror movie is really only scary when you've got some kind of threat to the protagonist, whether that be death or torture or some kind of psychological fuckery. Without tension, a horror movie just falls flat. And since this movie series has a reputation to live up to and a jump scare quota to meet, we aren't getting any Kubrick-level scares here. And since death isn't even in the realm of possibility for these characters continuity-wise, there's really not much tension to work on. They did introduce some new characters into the fray, one that can even use psychic abilities like Elise. Unfortunately, they also wasted half an hour on some shitty murder subplot to even bother developing these characters, so fuck off if you think I cared even in the slightest if they died. And this is the kind of lazy writing that really just spells the doom for modern horror. When talking to some friends in preparation for this review, someone mentioned that modern American horror movies weren't really made with me in mind. They had a formula down, and they weren't made for the serious horror fan. I agreed with this, but on the same hand, I also think it's just sad. I've never really been one to consider myself some sort of elite critic. You know, if you like something, you like something. I can't tell you not to like it, but I can tell you not to fall for cheap products. And that's what these movies are. They are lazily put together. Just because something spooks you or makes you jump, don't just assume it was a good movie. If you walk out of the theater and can't remember even just one of the main characters' names, it probably wasn't that great. This movie cost $10 million to make, but got $67 million domestically and another $100 million internationally. That's almost a total 17 times its initial budget. That's why they keep making these. It's why they're slated to make a 5th one in 2021. These movies are bad. They scrape the bottom of the barrel in terms of quality and substance, and they give little to be desired. Usually with Swholloween, I at least have fun watching spooky movies, even if they aren't great. This year was just terrible. I dreaded every moment putting this review together. It just made me that unpleasantly depressed. Tell people to stop seeing these movies. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Go watch better horror movies, please. Don't make me keep doing this. Don't make them bring me back again.